What if the love you've always believed existed was nothing more than a well-told illusion? What if behind promises of eternity and romantic stories there was no truth, but only masks, desires, and power games? Nietzsche never allowed himself to be seduced by the myth of true love. For him, this idea is nothing more than an invented consolation, a desperate attempt to give shape to what is, in essence, instinct, chaos, and impermanence. Love, when seen up close, is made of contradictory impulses: desire for possession, fear of loneliness, the will to eternalize what is temporary. Calling it true is to deny its own tragic and vital nature. This reflection doesn't intend to destroy your faith in love, but to free you from the illusions that imprison you. Ask yourself, isn't it precisely the fragility and fleeting intensity that make love so human? If this type of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow us on this journey through the shadows and revelations of Nietzsche's thought. From early on, we are fed with the idea that there exists a unique, perfect, and eternal love. Movies, songs, poetry, and even religious sermons repeat the same promise. Somewhere, there is someone destined to complete our existence. This myth, so seductive, carries within itself a promise of salvation and at the same time a silent condemnation. Because if there exists a true love, all other loves become flawed, insufficient, disposable. Nietzsche saw in this belief not a reflection of life, but a cultural invention, fruit of Christian morality and Western idealism, both obsessed with denying the impermanent flow of existence. For Nietzsche, the notion of a pure and eternal love is rooted in the same logic that invented the idea of an immortal soul and a perfect heaven. An attempt to transform what is transitory into eternal, what is instinct into essence, what is struggle into harmony. True love, in this perspective, is nothing more than a metaphysical consolation, a comforting lie that prevents us from facing love as it really is. Desire, chaos, necessity, appropriation, and also beauty. He observed that European culture, especially influenced by Christianity, molded an image of love associated with purity, unconditional surrender, and the promise of eternity. But behind this purity, a profound fear of life was hidden. To love in an eternal, perfect, and idealized way is an attempt to escape the anguish of impermanence. The myth of true love thus emerges as a remedy against the inevitable pain of loss, against the fragility of everything that lives. Only this remedy, instead of curing, poisons, because it distances us from what love really is, vital, imperfect, and temporary. Nietzsche saw in this a symptom of decadence. Love, transformed into moral virtue, ceased to be an affirmative force to become a prison. To love was no longer to live the intensity of encounter, but to fulfill a pre-written narrative of fidelity, sacrifice, and renunciation. Romantic idealization, which presents itself as beauty, hides a denial of life. Instead of embracing the risk and the tragic nature of love, we prefer to wrap it in promises of forever, in emotional contracts that claim to be indestructible. Look at the stories that most move us. Romeo and Juliet, for example, are not remembered for the real intensity of their youth, but as symbols of an absolute love that transcends even death. Tragedy becomes myth because it gives the impression that love can be eternal, even at the cost of life itself. Nietzsche would warn us, there is no transcendence in love, only intensity lived here and now. The search for true love is, in fact, flight from the very reality of loving. When we believe in this myth, we become slaves to it. How many don't remain in unhappy relationships because they fear destroying the idea that they found their soulmate? How many don't get frustrated repeatedly because they expect from the other a perfection that will never come? Nietzsche invites us to perceive that the suffering of love doesn't come from its instinctive nature, but from the illusion that it should be something beyond that. Love hurts more because we believe it should save us, when in truth it only exists as life experience, with its falls, its imperfections, and its finitude. The myth of true love, therefore, is not just an innocent fantasy, but a cultural strategy that keeps us trapped in unrealistic expectations. It prevents us from loving what is, replacing reality with the ideal. Nietzsche, always suspicious of ideals, exposes this trap and invites us to strip love of its masks, facing it in its brutal nakedness, an encounter of forces, of desires, of wills that cross and transform each other mutually, but that can never freeze in eternity. If there is something true in love, Nietzsche would say, it is precisely the fact that it is never the same, never remains, never allows itself to be imprisoned in fixed concepts. The myth of eternal love dies, but living love continues, pulsing, unpredictable, unstable, and for that very reason, profoundly human. To understand what Nietzsche thought about love, it's necessary to remember that all his philosophy revolves around a central idea, the will to power. It's not about power in the political sense, like domination of peoples, nor just physical force, but a vital energy that moves all living beings. For Nietzsche, to live is to affirm oneself, to expand, to conquer internal and external spaces. It's in this context that he interprets love, not as pure surrender, but as one of the most intense forms of expression of the will to power. Love, far from being altruistic, is born from the desire for possession, for fusion, for growth through the other. To love is to want the other to belong to us, but it's also to want to project onto the other our vitality, our intensity, our excess of life. It's a double movement. The lover wants to take, and at the same time, to overflow. That's why Nietzsche distrusts narratives that transform love into pure donation. When someone says, "I love unconditionally," there is always an implicit condition, the need to keep alive that flow of power that love provides. In everyday gestures, this becomes clear. Think of an overwhelming passion. Jealousy appears not because the other belongs to us, in fact, but because the idea of losing that territory of power threatens our affirmation. The desire for exclusivity is, in reality, the desire to guarantee that that vital space continues to nourish us. Even caring gestures, apparently altruistic, carry this tension. When someone dedicates time and energy to the other, they don't do it just out of kindness. They do it because, seeing the other flourish, they also feel strengthened. To love is, thus, a form of self-expansion through the other. Nietzsche doesn't condemn this, on the contrary. He exposes the truth that moral traditions tried to hide. Christianity, for example, valued a love marked by renunciation. To love meant to sacrifice oneself, to give up oneself in favor of the other. This vision for Nietzsche is a poisoned lie, because it denies the instinctive nature of love. To love is not to annul oneself, but to affirm oneself. It's not to deny desire, but to dive into it. When we accept this perspective, we stop romanticizing and start living love in its real potency. The will to power also manifests in the way we idealize whom we love. Often we don't see the person as they are, but as what we project onto them. It's as if love transformed the other into a mirror where we reflect our dreams, our fears, and our hunger for eternity. This projection is not a moral error, but a vital function. We need to create images to sustain the bond, and these images feed our will to live. Still, Nietzsche warns us, confusing projection with reality is falling again into the myth. The true encounter happens when we accept that the other will never be exactly as we imagine them, and that to love is also to face this difference. In a common relationship, we can perceive the invisible struggle of the will to power. A couple that falls intensely in love experiences the ecstasy of uniting forces. However, with time, subtle disputes arise. Who decides more? Who influences more? Who gives in more? It's not about banal fights, but about a vital dynamic that reveals how love is a battlefield, not just a refuge. To love, according to Nietzsche, is to accept that this tension never disappears because love is movement, not stability. When Nietzsche speaks of love, he doesn't speak of something romantic in the common sense. He speaks of forces that meet, of impulses that intertwine, of instincts that seek expression. Love, as will to power, is dangerous because it can destroy as much as it can create. It can make someone flourish in their intensity or lose themselves in obsession and resentment. That's why it demands courage. Courage to face that we don't love out of purity, but out of vital necessity, out of impulse for expansion. Accepting this may sound uncomfortable, but also liberating. It means we don't need to carry the guilt of loving in a selfish way, because all love is, to some degree, selfish. It means we don't need to expect love to be perfect or eternal, because it is a flow of forces that constantly change. To love is not to surrender to an impossible ideal, but to embrace the risk and intensity of allowing oneself to be moved by this power game that is ultimately expression of life itself. Deep down, what Nietzsche reveals is that love is one of the most intense experiences of the will to power, because it places us before fragility and strength at the same time. We love because we need and because we overflow, because we want to possess and because we desire to lose ourselves. Love is struggle, but it's also creation. It doesn't save us, but exposes us to life in its excess. Therefore, speaking of true love is a mistake. What exists is the truth of love as vital force, as a game of domination and surrender, as a field of intensities that can never be fixed in a formula. If there is something we can call true, it's the certainty that to love is always a risk, and it's precisely because it is risk that it is so fascinating. If there is something that Nietzsche knew how to observe with surgical eye, it was the depth of human illusions, and among all of them, few are as persistent as those involving love. Behind the apparent generosity of loving, there always hides a desire for possession. We want the other to be ours, for their life to revolve around us, for their attention, their body, and even their freedom to be under our orbit. Nietzsche didn't see this as a moral defect, but as inevitable expression of human nature. To love is, in essence, to desire, and to desire is inevitably to want to possess. When someone says, "You are everything to me," they are revealing the most instinctive face of love, transforming the other into symbolic property. No matter how much we try to soften this with words like partnership, union, or surrender, the truth is that love always carries a dimension of appropriation. We are animals that fear loneliness, and love emerges as a response to this fear. We love not only because the other enchants us, but because we believe that by possessing them, we will be protected from the anguish of emptiness. Nietzsche, in exposing this reality, didn't seek to condemn love, but to free it from romantic masks. The problem is not desiring or wanting to possess, but believing that this desire can be fully satisfied. No human being can transform into an object of absolute property. Even the most passionate lover maintains their individuality, their secrets, their inner freedom. It's precisely this limit that generates conflicts. Jealousy is born when we perceive that the other cannot be reduced to the role we created for them in our fantasies. And here, the illusion emerges. We create images about whom we love, we deposit expectations, we idealize virtues, we ignore defects. The real person becomes secondary. What matters is the character we project. We love less the being before us, and more the story we invented about them. That's why so many relationships crumble when daily coexistence brings down the veils of idealization. True love dissolves because deep down, it never existed. It was just the reflected image of our desire. Nietzsche said, "We are poets of our own love. We construct narratives, internal dramaturgies to sustain enchantment." This explains, for example, the sensation of completeness that so many say they feel when falling in love. It's not the other who completes us. It's the story we tell about them that gives us this sensation of unity. The danger is believing too much in this fiction, forgetting that it is by nature unstable and temporary. Desire, when not recognized as such, transforms into a trap. The passion that seemed liberating becomes prison when it demands absolute exclusivity, when it doesn't admit limits, when it transforms the other into an extension of ourselves. Nietzsche saw in this movement a reflection of the will to power distorted by resentment. Instead of affirming life in the intensity of encounter, we try to freeze it, fix it in promises of eternity. We want to trap what, by nature, is free and mutable. In daily life, this manifests in subtle ways. The person who demands constant proofs of love, who charges declarations, who tests the partner's loyalty, doesn't seek just security. They seek to confirm an illusion. They want to hear that they are irreplaceable, that they are the only one, that they occupy an eternal place in the other's heart. But Nietzsche would say that this need reveals more fear than love. The true loving encounter doesn't need absolute guarantees because it knows that nothing in the world can offer this certainty. And yet, without illusions, perhaps love would be unbearable. Nietzsche recognizes that we need masks, idealizations, small lies that give meaning to experience. The difference is in not confusing the mask with reality. To love is inevitably to invent. But it's possible to invent knowing that it's invention, without being imprisoned by it. This is the point where love ceases to be deception and becomes art. We create stories knowing they are stories, and still choose to live them intensely. True love, in this sense, never existed, because what exists is always crossed by desire and illusion. We don't love the other as they are, but as we see them through the filters of our lack and our imagination. To love is to project, and to project is to distort. The question for Nietzsche is not to eliminate this distortion, but to learn to live with it lucidly, without deceiving ourselves with promises of purity. Perhaps love's greatest beauty lies precisely in this paradox. It's made of desire that never satisfies itself, of possession that never materializes, of illusions that always dissolve. It is, at the same time, lie and revelation. It reveals our vital force because it shows us how much we need the other, and lies because it hides this need under the mask of eternity. By accepting this contradiction, love ceases to be prison and becomes tragic experience, like life itself. We no longer need to seek an unattainable ideal, but we can dive into the real. Love desire, knowing it is insatiable. Love possession, knowing it is impossible. Love illusion, knowing it is just a game. In this game, love finds its true intensity, not as salvation, but as risk, fragility, and creation. If until here we've seen how love is made of desire, possession, and illusion, now we enter even deeper territory, romanticism and its attempt to transform this turmoil into eternity. The romantic ideal, so exalted in poetry, novels, and songs, seems at first glance a celebration of love. But for Nietzsche, it's a subtle poison. A denial of life, a desperate attempt to fix in stone what is, by essence, flow. Romanticism was born as a revolt against cold rationalism and against the hard logic of modernity. It wanted to return to life the intensity, the rapture, the infinite, but in doing this, it created a new prison. the idea that love needs to be absolute, eternal and redemptive. It's love as the greater meaning of existence, as that which will save us from emptiness. And here is the point where Nietzsche raises his criticism. When we transform love into an idol, we stop living real love. Nietzsche saw in the romantic ideal the same logic of Christianity. Both promise transcendence, both deny life as it is. Christianity promises an eternal heaven, romanticism promises eternal love. In both cases, what is temporary, imperfect and unstable becomes intolerable. To love for an instant is not enough, one must promise forever. To love a real body, with limits and flaws, is not enough. One must invent the soulmate. It's as if life in its rawness were never sufficient. This refusal of impermanence is what Nietzsche calls resentment. The resentful man cannot bear reality and creates illusions to protect himself from it. Romanticism, then, is resentment disguised as beauty. It doesn't accept that love is tragic and finite, and therefore covers it with veils of eternity. But in denying the tragic character, it also denies life's own intensity. Observe the most common discourses about love. There is always the promise of completeness. I found my other half. Now I am whole. Nothing can separate us. These statements sound poetic, but hide an incapacity to live life as excess, as imperfection. The romantic ideal wants to freeze the instant, fix the flame of passion in an eternal fireplace. However, Nietzsche would say that it's precisely the flame that goes out that gives meaning to fire. Love that lasts forever doesn't exist. What exists is love that consumes itself, that transforms, that dies to give place to other encounters. The great tragedy of romanticism is transforming this natural death into failure. If a love ends, it's because it wasn't true. Indeed, this logic imprisons millions of people in cycles of guilt, resentment, and incessant search for an ideal that never materializes. Nietzsche would tell us that it's not love that fails, but the lie they told about it. Love wasn't born to save anyone, nor to offer eternity. It was born to intensify life, even if for a brief moment. Let's take fairy tales as an example. They all end the same way, with the couple united in a happily ever after. This formula not only feeds unrealistic expectations, but also erases reality. Routine conflicts wear end. Nietzsche would call this disguised nihilism. It's a refusal to look at life as it is, emotional anesthesia. And when we believe too much in this ideal, we end up despising what life truly offers us. Loves that last months or years, intense passions that burn quickly, affections that transform into friendship, farewells that teach us more than permanences. Romanticism, by wanting eternity, kills the instant. By wanting purity, it suffocates desire. By wanting salvation, it transforms love into burden. What could be celebration becomes obligation. The one who loves feels obligated to keep the flame alive, to repeat daily the promise of eternity, even when life has already taken care to show that nothing lasts forever. Nietzsche teaches us that this obligation is contrary to the affirmative spirit. To affirm life is to accept its movement, is to love the instant for the instant without demanding from it the impossible. Of course, Nietzsche wasn't against love, but against its falsification. Romanticism is one of those falsifications that poison experience. It prevents us from living the tragic joy of love, that joy that recognizes transitoriness and still surrenders with intensity. To love is not to deny the end, but to live as if the end were part of the dance itself. When we perceive this, something transforms. The weight of eternal promise dissolves, and love recovers its lightness. We no longer need to demand that it last forever, nor that it complete us. We can simply live, knowing that each encounter is unique, unrepeatable, and, precisely for that reason, valuable. It's this liberation from the romantic ideal that opens the way for a more authentic form of love, closer to what Nietzsche would call affirmation of life. True love, as a promise of eternity, never existed, but real love, tragic, imperfect, and ephemeral, has always been before us. And perhaps it's only by embracing this imperfection that we can, in fact, experience love in its fullness. If romanticism denies life by idealizing love as eternal, Nietzsche invites us to an opposite direction, to live love as tragedy. But not tragedy in the common sense of something merely sad or painful. For Nietzsche, the tragic is the essence of existence, accepting that life is made of contradictions, of ephemeral beauties, of forces that create and destroy at the same time. Tragic love is that which embraces this condition without illusions, without promises of eternity, but with total intensity. What does it mean to love tragically? It means recognizing that all love is born with a death sentence. Sooner or later, it will change form or end. No encounter is eternal. No passion lasts intact forever. Tragic love doesn't try to deny this. On the contrary, it finds its strength precisely in impermanence. It's the consciousness that time is limited that gives value to the instant. To love tragically is to live each moment as if it were unique, knowing it will never repeat in the same way. Nietzsche learned this from the Greeks, who celebrated tragedy as the supreme form of art. For them, life didn't need justification beyond itself. Suffering and joy were intertwined, and human greatness was in bearing this weight without appealing to illusions. Love, in the same logic, doesn't need a greater meaning, doesn't need to promise eternity. It justifies itself by its intensity. Think of an overwhelming passion that lasts a few months and then dissolves. For the romantic gaze, this would be a disappointment. If it ended, it wasn't true. For the tragic gaze, this was an explosion of life that was worth precisely because it happened and consumed itself. The flame that burns quickly is no less fire than that which lasts years. Each form of love has its measure, and none of them needs to be judged by the criterion of eternity. Affirmative love, in this perspective, is the refusal to cling to resentments. How many times, after the end of a relationship, doesn't someone spend years repeating, "I wasted my time, I was deceived, it wasn't true love"? This posture is nihilistic, Nietzsche would say, because it devalues the lived experience. Affirmative love doesn't ask if it was worth it, because it knows that all experience is, in itself, an addition of intensity to life. To love, even if for a short time, is already affirmation of existence. In this sense, Nietzsche proposes a radical inversion. It's not eternal love that proves its truth, but love that accepts its finitude. To love someone is not to want to freeze their presence, but to dance with the certainty that, sooner or later, the music will end. Whoever loves tragically doesn't fear the end, because they know the end is part of love's beauty. It's precisely because it's condemned to disappear that love has value. If it were eternal, it would lose its urgency, its flame, its vibration. In daily life, this vision can transform the way we relate. Instead of charging the other with promises of forever, we can cultivate gratitude for what has already been lived. Instead of living tormented by fear of loss, we can live intensely in the present, knowing that loss is inevitable. This doesn't mean coldness or absolute detachment, but lucid surrender. To love tragically is to surrender without demanding guarantees, is to risk oneself without demanding reward. Nietzsche believed that this type of love is closer to authentic life because it doesn't try to escape pain. It knows that to love is also to suffer, is also to expose oneself to vulnerability, is also to lose. But instead of seeing in this a reason to give up, it sees it as an opportunity to become stronger, deeper, more capable of affirming existence. Tragic love is not less intense than romantic love, It's more intense precisely because it doesn't sustain itself on illusions. Imagine a couple that lives together for years and at a certain moment separates. The romantic gaze may interpret this as failure, but the tragic gaze sees something else. Two paths that crossed, that created something together, that lived an unrepeatable period, and that now follow to new forms of life. There was no failure. There was fullness of a time that fulfilled its cycle. To love affirmatively is to accept this cycle without resentment. Perhaps the most Nietzschean phrase about love would be, love without asking for eternity. Love knowing it may end. Love knowing the other is free. Love knowing there are no guarantees. This love is more difficult because it demands courage. But it's also truer because it doesn't need masks. By proposing tragic and affirmative love, Nietzsche doesn't take away our hope. He offers us freedom, freedom to love without fear, to live without false promises, to embrace imperfection as part of beauty. Love that doesn't need to be eternal to be full is the only one that truly brings us closer to life in all its intensity. We arrive at the point where Nietzsche asks us for courage, courage to love without lying. This doesn't mean a cold, calculated, or distant love, but precisely the opposite, a love lived without illusions, a love that doesn't hide behind impossible promises, a love that doesn't pretend eternity when everything in the world is movement and impermanence. To love without lying is to accept that love doesn't need to be perfect to be true. It's already true precisely because it's human, contradictory, and unstable. The first step for this love is to undo the idea of completeness. How many times do we hear that the other completes me? Nietzsche would see in this a confession of weakness. Depending on someone to feel whole is a way of denying one's own vital force. To love without lying is to understand that nobody completes us. We are the ones who overflow and find in the other a space for this expansion. Love isn't born from lack, but from excess. It's not deficiency, it's potency. The second step is to abandon the demand for eternity. Romanticism taught us to measure love's value by its duration. But if we apply this criterion, every intense flame will seem like failure because, sooner or later, it will go out. Nietzsche proposes another measure, intensity. Love isn't measured in years, but in depth. To love without lying is to live each instant without calculating how long it will last. It's to surrender to the present as if it were absolute, without demanding guarantees from the future. A third aspect is recognizing illusion without being dominated by it. To love is inevitably to create images, to project dreams, to idealize the other. There's no problem with this, as long as we know they are projections. The problem arises when we confuse the mask with reality, when we demand that the other correspond to the fiction we invented. To love without lying is to love the other's reality, with their flaws and limits, without trying to transform them into a character from our fantasies. This love also demands honesty with oneself. How many times don't we enter relationships just to escape loneliness, to have company, to satisfy social expectations? How many times don't we maintain bonds just out of fear of emptiness, out of the weight of routine, out of the difficulty of letting go? Nietzsche would say that this love is not authentic, but cowardly. To love without lying is to look straight at our motivations and ask, am I here out of vitality or out of fear? Am I here because I choose or because I cling to an illusion? In daily life, this love translates into lightness. It's not a love that suffocates with demands, but that leaves the other free. It's not a love that demands impossible promises, but that contents itself with the intensity of now. It's not a love that transforms the end into failure, but that accepts it as part of life. A couple that lives this way doesn't need oaths of eternity. It needs only the courage to renew itself each day, knowing that nothing is guaranteed. Nietzsche would call this affirmative love, a love that says yes to life, even in its pain, even in its transitoriness. It's a love that doesn't ask for salvation, but that celebrates existence. And it's precisely because it doesn't rely on illusions that this love is stronger. It doesn't crumble when initial passion transforms, because it never promised to be static. It doesn't generate resentment when it comes to an end, because it never pretended to be forever. It doesn't imprison, because it knows that freedom is a condition for authenticity. To love without lying is not easy. It demands maturity to deal with impermanence, courage to face solitude, lucidity to not get lost in illusions. But at the same time, it's the only love that makes us more alive. It's love that doesn't deny tragedy, but that finds in it its beauty. It's love that doesn't seek eternity, but that intensifies each instant. It's love that doesn't promise anything beyond what it can offer. The experience of living with someone for a time, something that transforms us. And in the end, this is Nietzsche's greatest lesson about love. There is no true love in the sense of something pure, eternal, and perfect. There is real love, made of instincts, of illusions, of desires, of pains, and of joys. There is love as tragedy, as risk, as vital force. To love without lying is to abandon the search for the ideal and dive into the real. It's to say yes to love, not despite its imperfections, but because of them. Because it's precisely in imperfection that it shows itself human, intense, and transformative. We arrive at the end of this journey through the shadows and revelations of Nietzsche's thought about love. We've seen that what we call true love never existed, because it was always sustained by illusions of eternity, purity, and completeness. We discovered that love is not a heavenly refuge, but a vital force made of desire, possession, struggle, and also of beauty. It doesn't save us from life. It throws us even deeper into it. Nietzsche teaches us that to love is to accept tragedy, is to embrace the instant knowing it is temporary, is to affirm life without needing guarantees. The most authentic love is not that which promises to last forever, but that which surrenders intensely while it exists. To love without lying is to free oneself from romantic illusions and live the experience of love as risk, as creation, as celebration of the here and now. And now I ask you, what belief about love has imprisoned you the most until today? What city are you watching from? Comment down below and share your experiences with our community that dives deep into such intense reflections.